Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Please take this opportunity to silence all electronic devices. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to West Point's 4th Annual Faculty Panel. My name is Colonel Raymond Kimball, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief of Faculty Learning, Innovation, Collaboration, and Research, or FLICR, here at USMA. Welcome to everyone joining us on the West Point YouTube channel as well. I'm pleased to open today's event with remarks from the Association of the United States Army. Introducing our AUSA speaker is Cadet Perry Fulton of AUSA's West Point chapter.
I'm Cadet Perry Fulton, class of 2021. As a proud member of the Association of the United States Army's West Point chapter, it is my great honor to be part of AUSA's ongoing support for the faculty panel program. I grew up in an AUSA household, and my father, David Fulton, USMA class of 1986, is an AUSA chapter president in Europe. I'd now like to introduce the faculty panel's opening speaker today. General Retired Robert B. Brown is the Executive Vice President of the Association of the United States Army. His last duty in the Army was as Commanding General of the U.S. Army Pacific. Previously, he was the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Combined Arms Center, Fort Leonard Wood. He served 12 years with various units focused on Indo-Pacific region, including as Commanding General of the I Corps and Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington. Deputy Commanding General of the 25th Infantry Division, Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, Training and Exercise Director J7 at the U.S. Pacific Command, Executive Assistant to the Pacific Command Commander, Plans Officer at the U.S. Army Pacific, and Commander of the 1st Brigade Combat Team Stryker 25th Infantry Division. He deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom as a Brigade Commander and a Deputy Division Commander. He is a 1981 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy and holds master's degrees from the University of Virginia and National Defense University, where he was a distinguished graduate. Ladies and gentlemen, General Brown.
This is General Retired Bob Brown. I'm Executive Vice President at the Association of the United States Army, and we're very proud to sponsor the faculty panel during Projects Day. You know, it helps, the Association of the United States Army is the premier nonprofit educational and professional association. We educate, inform, and connect. And this is a great way to make sure we can help, AUSA can help West Point as it helps the Army. And that's such an important connection. Really excited about the theme of research in a connected world for this year's faculty panel. And I'll tell you, my hat's off to the faculty that participated, because I know, having been on the staff and faculty in the past, there's a real burden of time. Nobody comes and says, hey, don't worry about your teaching responsibilities, your other duties. You're really doing a lot of work. You're coming in early, you're spending your lunch hour, and you're working late to get at this extra effort. But it makes a huge difference. And it's so important that our Army benefits from the work up there and the incredible talent at West Point that affects our entire Army. And I can tell you, when I was in command positions commanding the Maneuver Center of Excellence in Fort Benning, or Fort Leavenworth in the Combined Arms Center, or even out at First Corps or the U.S. Army Pacific, I looked forward to Projects Day and got a lot of great ideas and was always impressed with what the faculty and the cadets came up with to help our Army. I also want to congratulate the Scott Clark Award. The team of cadets that worked on that. I know that'll be announced right after this, but you know, to me, that's such an important award for our whole Army, as it best supports the soldier, the individual, the team of cadets that best support soldiers. Makes a huge difference. So thanks for all you're doing up there. Hope you have a great faculty panel, tremendous discussions. Projects Day itself is going to go extremely well, and is just, again, such a benefit to our Army. The Association of the United States Army is very proud to once again make sure we can help West Point, help our Army at this critical time and important time for our nation. So enjoy it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Perry, for the introduction. Before we begin today's panel, it is my great privilege to announce the recipient of the 2021 Scott R. Clark Award. This award, named after Scott Clark, USMA class of 1985, honors a Projects Day effort that demonstrates an innovative approach to solving a problem of direct application to the Army. Past Clark awardees have included innovative efforts such as last mile optical communications, a laser-based computer network, the Soldier Power Augmentation Readiness Kit, a battery charging system, the M249 Squad Automatic Weapon Reduced Recoil, and the Raspberry Pi Android Security System Module. This year, 2 departments submitted 4 nominations for the Clark Award. These submissions were evaluated on the following criteria: impact of the innovation on the soldier, scope of the innovation, significance of the innovation, and impact of the innovation on the Army. The 2021 Scott R. Clark Award goes to Warehouse Autonomous Robots, Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering, created by cadets Austin Fox, Andres Syed, Sarah Scales, and Jafar Stone, assisted by faculty advisor Lieutenant Colonel Steve Cruz. Please join me in a round of applause for the Scott Clark Award recipients. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, Brigadier General Cindy Jebb, Dean of the Academic Board, will give some introductory remarks.
Well, thank you, Colonel Kimball, and greetings, everyone. A warm welcome to our faculty panel. It's my privilege to be here with you today, and I want to commend our Clark Award winners and their advisor and all those who've made this event happen, especially Colonel Ray Kimball, our Chief of Faculty Learning, Innovation, Collaboration, and Research Hub. Thanks to all our faculty panelists. And I'd also like to extend our deep appreciation to General Bob Brown for his insights, leadership, and support. And thank you to AUSA. We sincerely appreciate all your support as well. And it's great to see Mr. John Buckheit here. As we begin events like this, it's good to take stock of what's happening here today. We recognize that many here have gone through tremendous adversity over the last 12 months with COVID. Nevertheless, we have learned to adapt, and we change the way we learn, the way we teach, and how we operate. We all experienced significant disruptions to our schedule in the last year, from transitioning to remote learning, to canceling conferences or making them virtual, to reducing our travel and changing our daily routines. Even this great event, the faculty panel was canceled last year due to the pandemic. But here we are in 2021. We all found a way together, and we are holding this event as evidence that we continue to learn, grow, and adapt. That need to adapt as a learning community is why I am so delighted that this year's panel is addressing research in a connected world. Despite all the challenges of the pandemic, it has in fact reinforced the importance of finding all possible ways to connect with one another and to learn from one another. I'm particularly proud of how these scholars have pursued their research during these truly extraordinary circumstances. And I'm delighted that we can share the fruits of their work, both in person and via live stream, to others who can't be here. And for all of those watching, regardless of the modality, I'd like to emphasize that despite COVID, our mission has not stopped. We continue to educate leaders of character, and as part of that education, we continue to conduct research. That research remains focused on enhancing the education of our cadets, developing the faculty professionally, and addressing issues of interest to the Army and the nation. Tomorrow, you will see the strong mentorship relationships between faculty and cadets as you engage during the presentations and see the pride the faculty have for their cadets and the cadets' critical thinking skills, their confidence, their humility, and their self-awareness. Our comparative advantage is that our academy is inherently interdisciplinary. So we explore innovative solutions to complex problems through interdisciplinary work. Projects Day is also a wonderful reminder of all the connections our academy maintains with organizations across DoD, industry, academe, and especially the Army. So now let's proceed to the main event for today, our faculty panel. As I mentioned, our theme is research in a connected world, and chairing this panel today is Colonel Krista Chuar, the professor and deputy head of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. Krista.
Thank you, ma'am. I am quite honored today to moderate the 2021 Pre-Projects Day faculty panel, and very eager to hear about and discuss these great projects that advance the theme of research in a connected world. I'll start by introducing each of our five panel members, and then I'll invite each of them to present their work. Immediately to my left is Mr. Brian Dodwell from the Combating Terrorism Center, and he'll talk to us about a project that achieved important objectives in the information operations campaign against ISIS. Next to him is Major Caleb McCollum from the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering, and he'll tell us about how he created an interactive virtual field experience for the physical geology course. To his left is Colonel Victor Deakins from the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership. He'll introduce the technology incidental learning effects, or TILE model, that he and his co-authors came up with. Then comes Lieutenant Colonel Andre de Mello Franco, a Brazilian exchange officer with the Department of Foreign Languages. He will share his insights about the value that exchange officers who are assigned to USMA bring to cadets, as well as the USMA staff and faculty. And finally, we have Dr. Laura Hooten from the Department of History, and she will describe the Black History Project at West Point. Each panelist will deliver a quick presentation of their topic, and then we'll have 30 minutes for questions and answer discussion. If you're watching online, please feel free to type your questions into the YouTube chat as we go, so that we can sequence those with questions from our live audience here in the Hague room. So we'll start now with Mr. Dodwell.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. It's a very good event, and we participated in the past from the CTC, and it's fantastic to be part of it again. So thanks, General Jeb, and everybody else for the invitation. So I'll spend a couple minutes talking about the project that I'm here to discuss, and that's the Amala project. This is a project where we work with some partners, both within the State Department, along with various entities across the DoD, to look at a particular set of documents that we felt could have some impact in the information campaign against the Islamic State, or ISIS. So the CTC has a long history of conducting research projects in support of operational partners. For over 12 years, we've supported SOCOM through a project that takes captured enemy material and other classified documents and gets them declassified for public release to be able to conduct open source analysis on these documents, but then also to release the documents themselves to the broader environment, to the world, to both sort of better understand critical issues related to terrorism and counterterrorism, but also to achieve and support information operations campaigns that the U.S. government is currently conducting around the world, primarily, frankly, to expose hypocrisies and inconsistencies that our adversaries display in the way they talk publicly versus the things they do privately. So this project kind of falls underneath that umbrella. Next slide, please. So, and it really starts here. This is an image, a screen grab taken from a video of the operation on October 26, 2019, that resulted in the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is the longtime leader and caliph, or so-called caliph of the Islamic State, or ISIS. What was interesting is after his death, relatively quickly, ISIS announced a successor to al-Baghdadi. That individual was provided, or we were provided with one name of this individual, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Quraishi. Now, as we know, this is like most operatives in these organizations. This was a nom de guerre, so to speak. So the question was posed, who is this guy? Where did he come from? And what is his true identity? There was lots of speculation about this. Next slide, please. So this is the individual here. What we knew about him at the time is not much. Yeah, he had some formal religious training. He had participated in a number of pretty gruesome activities as part of ISIS, to include the Yazidi genocide. And that he was a senior leader, obviously within ISIS, but also in their predecessor organizations, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Islamic State of Iraq. There was lots of disputed information about this guy, his particular origin, where he was from, his ethnicity, and there was rumors about his previous detention by Allied forces in Iraq. Next slide, please. So truth is, he was in fact detained by U.S. forces in 2008. He was actually captured in January 2008, was held for about a year before being handed over to the Iraqi government, and ultimately was released. And as part of his detention, he was obviously interrogated and asked many questions about his involvement in the organization. Those questions and those interrogations resulted in about 60 tactical interrogation reports. These are documents which summarize the course of the questions and answers as part of the interrogation. And these documents were held classified for obvious reasons for many years. Last year, we had conversations with partners of the State Department and DoD about an effort to release these documents and take them, push them out to the broader community because it was felt they contained information that would be good for the broader world, frankly, to understand about who this person was. And so what we did was we partnered with them, and this is based on our history at the CTC of doing this type of work with this type of material, and we conducted some pretty rigorous analysis of the documents and then pushed out some analytical products as part of our publication, the CDC Sentinel, along with the source documents themselves. And next slide. And so what the documents released, actually we'll skip this one in the interest of time, go here. So a number of really interesting findings came out of this effort. First and foremost, the current leader of ISIS is a rat. So we'll just put that out there. This guy informed on his colleagues like you wouldn't believe. And so what you see on the screen here, obviously not to be read, but just to get a sense of the scope of it. This is just from the first 3 TRs out of about 60. This is the number, each line here is an individual that he informed on within the organization. So the bottom line is he dimed out dozens of his colleagues, provided significant information about the scope of the organization, its organizational structure, where individuals were located, strategic decision-making of leadership, about where their operations were being conducted and why. So lots of really fascinating information that he provided to interrogators at the time that helped our forces in Iraq achieve some pretty important successes. So pushing this out to the broader community obviously had some pretty important impacts. We like to believe, one, it led to a broader understanding of who this individual was, but also showed his own, frankly, current supporters what this guy was all about and what he was willing to do to further his own survival. Next slide, please. As one particular case in point, this individual is Abu Kaswar al-Maghribi. This is an individual who is considered to be about the second or third in command of the Islamic State of Iraq, a regional leader. And this is an individual that was identified by Amala, by his picture. Amala gave information on his accent, his bed down location, that he'd met him, described his interactions, geolocated where his camps were and the different buildings that he generally hung out in. Very specific information. And while certainly in an open source environment, we couldn't talk explicitly about this, I think you can draw the conclusion that when this individual was ultimately killed in an operation in October of 2008, there was probably a connection between the information provided and his ultimate fate. So interesting to know if you are one of Amala's followers, that this is what he will do to you if he gets put in that position. Next slide. So one of our objectives here was to take the research and be able to make sure that it had a broadest possible audience. So we worked with some media organizations, provided the documentation to them, all very on the up and up in terms of giving them the freedoms to do their job. There was no agenda, there was no rules given to them. It was, here's some documents that we're going to be releasing. Do some good work with it. The one individual was the woman here in the picture, Janan Musa with Alan TV, based out of Dubai, who's a fantastic journalist who does some really groundbreaking work, looking at jihadist organizations in the region. She actually did some significant field work to take the information from the documents, go out there and do some more digging, and found some really fascinating information about this individual, and ultimately produced 3, video reports on the documents and on this individual that resulted in about 9 million impressions on Facebook and significant impact across the social media landscape. Next slide. We also conducted a panel event to discuss the findings of the research that we had conducted with various experts from around the field of terrorism studies. I had about 500 people call in or observe the event, I should say. Next slide. From varied locations around the world, as you see here. Next slide. And it resulted in a number of other media articles, a couple examples on the screen here. Next slide. So limited time, but just to wrap up, a number of really interesting things came out of this. One was some of the challenges and opportunities that come through partnering with a variety of different entities. So this was a project where we tried to conduct, rigorous independent analysis of source documents, of primary source material, working with partners both inside the government and in the media to both make sure we were conducting the research rigorously, ethically, and really kind of further the field and really have a better understanding of the organizations that we are tasked with studying, but then also to support our operational partners in achieving the objectives they have with this information. And ultimately, it's a mutually beneficial arrangement whereby they're able to take material, get it pushed out to a broader audience, and we're able to conduct some really interesting research on these topics and firm up a partnership that is very important, I think, certainly for our organization, for the academy, and for the broader research community. So I'll stop there.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Dodwell, and Major McCollum, go ahead.
Brigadier General Jeb, Colonel Kimball, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to present some of our work that we've done over the last year to really bounce forward in this virtual environment and then come back stronger than ever. And so I'll be presenting today this talk, Virtual Geology Rocks, about the process of constructing a virtual field trip and really the broader application of those tools for our West Point community. Next slide, please. Cadets enrolled in EV 388A Physical Geology have participated in this field trip for the last 51 years, 52 years, I think, if I do my math right. 1969, cadets first participated on this trip, and they've gone on the trip almost every year and every semester since then. And it was really, truly heartbreaking to think that our cadets wouldn't be able to participate on this trip. You know, it's a trip designed for our environmental scientists, environmental engineers, and geographers, and it covers the geologic structure, but also the history and culture of the Hudson Valley. It's a trip that has approximately 11 stops and covers 200 miles. And so our faculty, next slide please, used our unstructured time, our study day last fall, to go out and cover that 200 miles and those 11 stops and try to bring this experience back. And so we did that by recording an instructor at each stop, taking lots of pictures. Obviously audio is part of the video recording. And we tried to capture the things that cadets would highlight on the trip, such as looking at sandstone through a hand lens, as you can see in the image there, or the scale of conglomerate, or some of the historical obelisks at historic Huguenot Street up in New Paltz, New York. And so we took that data and we brought it back to West Point. Next slide, please. And we compiled it and edited it into an Esri story map. And so this way, it's not just providing those video clips to our cadets, but instead one consolidated location. And a cadet can now scroll through and it takes them on the map to each of the stops. It's an interactive experience in the sense that they have pictures and video to answer questions about each of those stops. And this allows us in this course to bounce forward, because now this will be a supplementary resource for our cadets when they do get to go on the trip again in the future. They'll have this as a resource prior to, or read ahead if you will, and as study material. But maybe more important is the process, the methodology of creating an Esri story map. An Esri story map is not a GIS tool. It's about the story. It's a tool not for map makers. It's a tool for everyone. Cadets, faculty in every department at West Point can use this tool at the macro scale, like here in a geology field trip, but also even at a micro scale. An intro science class could use this tool to take cadets or students through a lab procedures 1 through 10 in a lab, going from bench to bench, for example, or perhaps a battlefield reenactment or staff ride. And so there's lots of applications for this tool that we're excited to use in the geography department, but also share this methodology with other departments. Next slide, please. And so thank you again for the time. I'd like to give a special thanks to Captain Tim Flagg and Major Nikki Harrell from the geography department for their work on this project, the support from the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about our work.
Okay, thank you, Major McCollum. And please, any of those questions that our online audience has, please type them into the YouTube chat. So go ahead, Colonel Deakins, with your work.
Thank you. And General Jeb and your team, man, we really appreciate the opportunity to present this research. And today I'm going to talk about the technology incidental learning effects model, the TILE model, I'd like to recognize my co-authors, Dr. Jeff Green and Dr. Dana Copeland, for their important work in helping us get here. Next slide, please. So what happens when you're in a line somewhere, scrolling Twitter, just flipping through, looking at headlines, and you happen to notice that somebody famous, according to Twitter, is engaged in some kind of criminal enterprise? But you decide not to pay attention to it and just scroll right on through. So why did you notice that particular tweet amongst your Twitter feed? How did you decide to dismiss it? And what did you learn? These are the questions that we're asking and hopefully providing some answers for with the tile model. Next slide, please. So with respect to that, what we're talking about here is really incidental learning, learning that happens by accident. And so first, before we can talk about that in some detail, we need to define it. So if you'll build with me, please, the first of those things is that for our model, it needs to be something that happens in a technology environment. Certainly incidental learning can happen in other ways, but for our model, we're particularly interested in that. It happens in a technology environment, broadly defined, including things like social media, but not limited to that. Also, you have to be engaging with that technology for some purpose other than learning. And that's what makes it incidental. And others have defined this in different ways, but for us, this is how we focused on it. And that exposure should lead to learning. And you can see some key terms here that we've highlighted as we work to define that, as with any terms that we investigate. Certainly there are lots of other ways we could think about it. But when we think about learning here, we're talking about changes in thinking, beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, or values that happen when you're not attempting to learn. And finally, there's an important context here, and that is that it's believed that much of learning happens incidentally. This is a very difficult thing to measure, but those who study education research have proposed that quite a bit, and certainly the majority of learning may happen incidentally. So as we think about our connected world and technology, understanding how much of what we learn is happening incidentally is important. Next slide, please. So when I think about connecting this model to our panel today and thinking about research in a connected world, there's this first point that first off, our information environment is very complex and it is absolutely reshaping our world. When we think about learning and how we're doing that in a technology environment, we can see that the complexity of it just adds to the challenge of measuring that learning. And next, that incidental learning has real effects. Some of the literature that we reviewed as we started to craft this model was in politics, for example. So what happens with incidental learning with respect to politics or information sciences? What are the effects of that as people learn things they didn't necessarily intend to do? And finally, the last build here, please, is why this model? So my colleagues and I are learning scientists or work in educational psychology. Traditionally, that means we've worked on models of learning that are purposeful. But as we investigated some of these other fields, and as they talked about incidental learning, we thought we could add to that. And the research we do specifically is about critical thinking. We've talked about digital literacy and the interactions of those two things. And that's why we're hopeful that our model can be additive with respect to what's out there already around incidental learning. Next slide, please. So this is a look at that model, but I'm going to walk through it fairly quickly and highlight 6 key things. And that starts on the next slide, please. And if you'll build that first thing out. So when we think about the technology incidental learning model, we actually think where it begins, while it is of course recursive, as you'll see that the things that we learn influence the things we're interested in the future. We think that our interest and motivation shape the content that we are exposed to, even if it's incidentally. So, for example, there are key actors out there that influence what we might encounter in our social media. There's users for sure, but there are also journalists or algorithms, and all these things play a role in the things that we bump into. And as users, there are different reasons why we might shape what we encounter in a technology environment. What are the things that we choose to follow or engage with? So our user interest and motivations shape the technology context that we're exposed to. And next build, please. There are also these factors that influence what we notice. So in my initial scenario, I talked about the idea that you're scrolling through things. Some things you probably just paid no attention to, but there are factors about the user, factors about that content, and factors about the environment that influence whether or not a certain item leaps off at you. Some of those factors about the user might be prior knowledge. Is this something you're already interested in? Or is this something that stands out to you as salient because it's particularly different than what you believed? Environmental factors might be things like, how much time do I have? So how long am I in this line? And can I pay attention to it, or do I need to just move right along? And all three of these things play an influence on noticing. Bill, please. And then when noticing, people might do type 1 processing, which you could think of as automatic processing. Happens quickly, likely not engaging with working memory or that deep thinking, and that has an influence, next build please, on our knowledge and beliefs. And we think that, of course, could cause changes in our interest and motivations. But what if we dig a little deeper and engage in type 2 processing? That processing is again influenced by factors about the user, about the content, about the environment. And then it leads to one of these 3 R's. At the bottom here, we're showing, we think, more traditional learning. So if you choose to read and engage with something, it's likely that the things that educational psychology and educational literature overall tells us come into play. Things about self-regulated learning and motivation, because you're engaging with that content purposefully to learn. But what if you don't? What if you instead return or maybe ignore, right? Continue with what you're doing. Or you might, because technology gives us this opportunity, you might respond, like or share, or do something simple that doesn't require you to engage with it, as we're showing here at the bottom with a full read, but also is different than just returning to what you're doing. The evidence across these fields suggests that if you engage with it in some way, it might affect a wide variety of things. It could influence your knowledge and beliefs for sure. There's also a recognition of something called the news finds me perception, the idea that in today's digital environment, oftentimes people do not seek out things to learn from or the news because they trust that the systems they're engaged with are just bringing me the things I need to know. I'm not actively looking for this. The things that come onto my device or into my technology environment are the things I need to know. There's clear evidence about political things that can be influenced as you're engaging with it incidentally. And finally, you've probably heard lots of questions about echo chambers and filter bubbles and how significant they may be. There's lots of research going on about the influence of those. Certainly at the extremes, those ideas about echo chambers and filter bubbles are very concerning, but there is some evidence that shows that perhaps not at the extremes of certain ideas, they may not be as influential as we may think. And then finally, we can see again that there's this recursive nature of this, that the things that we're incidentally exposed to, again, influence our user interest and motivations. Next slide, please. So what we're hoping to do is to include and encompass some interesting findings from other fields of research like information science or political science, and add an educational psychology spin to this with the things that we know about learning to have a true influence on lots of different fields. We think about the implications of this work. If we understand more about the way people incidentally learn from technology, we might make changes in that technology. For example, looking back at our model, we might make changes to the context in which that information is presented. Or we might try to educate our users to become better curators of that knowledge so that they possess the skills to deal with things they're incidentally exposed to, hopefully employ reliable processes for learning, and reach conclusions that are meaningful. So I look forward to your questions about the model, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Colonel Deakins. And next up, we have Lieutenant Colonel Melo Franco.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Next slide, please. After 2 years serving as the Brazilian exchange officer at the United States Military Academy, talking about research in a connected world is quite appropriate, especially because I've been working during this period in a department with the fundamental mission of teaching its students to connect with other cultures through the learning of language, cultural practice, and throughout different regions of the world. Next slide. It is important to highlight that historically, the world's knowledge has been built and contributed to by all its peoples of all nations. Almost always, studies conducted in one country complement necessary information of studies conducted in other partner nations, creating a network of knowledge that will help achieve the common ultimate goal. An example is the current fight against the COVID-19 virus, where several countries simultaneously and cooperatively worked and are working on researches of vaccines or new medicines which alleviate the suffering of the general population. Next slide. Within the fields of study of interest to West Point, the participation of an international officer in academic teaching and research is of great importance, considering that when one studies the culture of other countries, Looking for the right answers is not always enough, as oftentimes looking for the right answers is only half of the battle, considering that to get to the right answers, it is necessary to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions will only make sense when one considers the cultural difference and the perspectives of people who come from different histories, different backgrounds, and also different economic or political realities. A recent example of this, next slide, is from this year, when a group of cadets decided to research combined operations currently carried out between the armies of Brazil and the United States for the Capstone project. Missing from their research was a cultural understanding of the historical importance of the Brazilian Army and its participation in World War II under the command of the US Fifth Army in northern Italy. Any Brazilian officer, when asked to talk about US-Brazil relations, always begins with the origins of the relationship between the two armies, starting with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force in the liberation of northern Italy from Nazi fascism. Next slide. Acting as an exchange officer here at West Point is much more than teaching. It is also opening doors to new experiences, creating conditions for direct contact between cadets and professionals who can bring their own perspectives on the history, institutions, and culture of the regions that are considered as fields of study in my department. Next slide. Last year, after pandemic forced the use of virtual tools, senior cadets from the Portuguese language military reading course had the unique opportunity to talk directly online to multiple Brazilian officers, including the Brazilian general officer acting as the commander of the United Nations force in Congo, the Brazilian commander of the jungle warfare training team that provides specialized training to Congolese soldiers, the Brazilian staff officer working in the United Nations mission in Lebanon, and to a Brazilian special forces officer who was, at that time, the Brazilian liaison officer at Fort Benning, Georgia. This semester, several cadets have had the opportunity to interact directly with Brazilian cadets of the Brazilian Army Military Academy in situations where they could practice the Portuguese language, deepen their knowledge on the local culture, and to know the traditions and particularities of the Brazilian Army and its cadets. Next slide. In summary, the presence of international officers at West Point allows the creation of important connections for cadets to build knowledge, expand their understanding, horizons, and perspectives, in addition to the work carried out in the classroom. The experience acquired during these multicultural interactions certainly will contribute to develop the critical thinking and the leadership characteristics that USMA instills in its cadets. Thank you, and open the world.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Melo Franco. And finally, we have Dr. Laura Hooton.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to thank General Jeb and also to thank AUSA and to recognize Academy leadership and Department of History leadership, both in person and online. I'm really excited to talk to you as a representative of the Black History Project at West Point, which is a project that focuses on looking at Black history at West Point in the Army and also larger in United States history. And what I have on the slide behind me, I understand online you probably won't be able to see it, which is fine. We have a website, and all of the information on these slides are available on our website as well. If you just Google Black History Project West Point, you'll be able to find it. It's the first link. And what is behind me is our mission, purpose, and vision statement, and I'm not going to bore you by reading it, but the important thing about this is part of what we decided to do in creating this project is we wanted something to be that was very permanent and that was also very flexible, both to the department needs, but also to engaging with existing US history, but also new histories and the changing world, both in the past as well as in the present. And so part of what we did is we created a 10-year plan. And that 10-year campaign plan operates around 3 lines of effort. And for non-Army, non-West Point people in the audience online, those are essentially themes or approaches that we're using as a center point to our project. Next slide. And so our first line of effort, our main line of effort, is educate and research. And this especially includes teaching resources, creating and developing these, as well as research opportunities, both for our faculty and for our cadets. And so the image on the slide is one of those initiatives. Because we were doing so much online teaching and online learning, we created a series of videos. We reached out to a bunch of our faculty and created a series of videos to use in the classroom, both in the digital space and also once we were back in person as well. And to get kind of more work out of these videos, we also created a playlist on our department YouTube channel. So this is the playlist. You can view it at any time. And for those inside of USMA, we have a Teams page that has a variety of materials, both for instructors and for cadets, including things like these videos that you can see. Next slide. And our second line of effort was lead and inspire. And this is particularly in first about creating a presence, especially at the academy. And part of the reason we are focusing on this is because we really wanted this line of effort to focus on mentoring and inspiring cadets in opportunities outside of the classroom. And so these images are some of the different types of things we've been able to do over the last few years. For example, prior to COVID, we were able to do some trips and events outside of USMA. So we did a walking tour here in Newburgh and across the road in Beacon to talk about Black history locally. We also had a group of cadets go to Washington, D.C. and look at a variety of locations for Black history. The picture here is in front of the African American Smithsonian Museum. And locally, especially since COVID, we did a series of Black history walking tours on post. We had about 200 staff, faculty, and students on those tours talking about Black history and USMA history. And we also have been engaged with cadets in a variety of ways in conversations about West Point history, about what it means to do history and to have these conversations, particularly around race and ethnicity. And this was with everything from clubs to sports teams to giving guidance to even company leadership about how to have these conversations. Next slide, please. And our third line of effort is about collaboration. And this is in some ways inherent to everything that we're doing, but we thought it was an important line of effort to highlight as well. And this is all about partnerships, both inside and outside of USMA. This allows us, first of all, to provide more opportunities for our faculty and our cadets to have meaningful conversations about a variety of topics. So 2 examples on the slide, we helped participate in one of the, and we've had faculty participating in all of the Dean's book clubs, talking about Colson Whitehead's book. But also our cadets have been integrating their work with other parts of the academy as well. So one of the cadets I'm working with is doing a senior thesis. He's defending it tomorrow, actually, on integrating the core squad here. And so he did a couple oral histories, including one with Gary Steele, and he collaborated with the Center for Oral History to do those and to also make them available on the Center for Oral History website. And this, again, is about spreading these conversations and having more of these conversations seamlessly in all of these different spaces. Last slide, please. And so all of this is all about seamless integration of the material. It's not necessarily about creating new spaces for these conversations, but to also bring Black history and bring West Point history into some of these already existing places and learning more about our world here and connecting that to things that are happening in the US as well. And so what I have on the slide is, first of all, our website. It's easier to Google it, but that's the URL. And for anyone inside of West Point, if you want, please contact the Black History Project to get activated on our Teams page. And you can email anyone on the project at the email address on the slide. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hooten. Very exciting. What a marvelous collection of interdisciplinary projects that you heard about. And we will now start the question and answer portion of the panel. For those in the live audience, I will attempt to repeat your question so we capture it on microphone for the online audience. So please allow me to do that before we go into the answer. I would like to start with a question that's come on the YouTube site from Lieutenant General Swam, and this is for Major McCollum. He wants to know if you've shared your tool with staff colleges, war colleges, major commands, or any of the other service academies.
Sir, thank you for that question. The Esri Story Map is a publicly accessible tool, and so that's one that's accessible right now to those institutions. We haven't specifically shared our geology field map, but we can certainly be in contact to share the methodology on how to build an Esri Story Map. One thing that we have done, we shared this work about a month or maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago at the Geologic Society of America. And we got interest from some of the local universities and junior colleges in the Hudson Valley. And so the field map, our story map is publicly accessible. It's not something that's restricted to westpoint.edu or a military network. It is publicly accessible. And so we're happy to share that. And I think that's a great idea, sir. I appreciate that insight of sharing this methodology with some of our higher institutions of learning in the Army. Thank you.
Okay, next I'd like to invite any questions from the room. Go ahead, please.
Colonel Brian Gibby from the Department of History. I was an intel officer in Iraq, so I was interested in the Combat Terrorism Center. And noticing that the documents that you release have the redactions are visible. And I know in an information warfare, everything has a message. So I was wondering if you could just talk about the reasoning as to why you would include the redactions in the products that you disseminate, if there are advantages of this.
All right, so quickly, the question is about the decision to include the redactions in the research that's shared.
Yeah, actually, the issue of redactions was one that we went round and round on for a long time, as you can imagine. Ultimately, those decisions did not come from our end. So those decisions were made by those who were looking at it from a security perspective and made those decisions on what the documents would ultimately look like. What we certainly wanted to have happen from our side is we wanted the documents to be as authentic as possible. And so showing where things were redacted keeps the integrity of the documents as original sources. And yes, we were well aware that you can derive certain things from where there are missing portions and so on and so forth. But our feeling was that speculation was going to happen anyway, and it was better to have sort of keep the integrity of the documents as much as possible. In terms of what was redacted, obviously we wanted to make sure that there could not be any accusations of cherry picking or these types of things, or hiding things that might not be on message, so to speak. And that's the great thing about sort of the position we're sitting in as researchers who are on the government side but operate in the academic space, is we do have the clearances where we could go look at the original source documents. So our researchers read everything that is in the originals. And so we could ensure, and we've done this a number of times with our prior projects, to make sure that when we are provided documents where we were not the ones who did the redactions ourselves, that we can make sure that the decisions made on what to redact did not change or influence the ultimate findings of the project, so to speak. And so that was really important for us as well. And we made that clear in the ultimate reporting that we did validate that there was nothing, nefarious being done to change the message or to influence the content of the documents in any one particular direction. There was also, as a related point, also significant debate over how many documents to release. And so, we were able to publicly say there was about 60 or so documents. Originally, only 3 were approved for release, even with some redactions. We pushed hard to get all of them released. Our point was, if you tell the public there's 60, but we're only going to show you 3, I think you're leading people down the road to assume that certain decisions were made for reasons that might not be on the up and up. Ultimately, we were successful, and while we only released 3 in the first round, a couple months later, we released 50 plus or so. There's only a handful that have not been released. And that was a great victory for us to be able to say publicly, like, this is everything that's there. And it answered some questions that were raised initially about why certain ones released and others weren't. And so by pushing them all out the door, while you are potentially showing your hand a bit in terms of how certain things are conducted in that community, when you're engaging in this type of information campaign, we've often felt at the CTC that our adversary is very aggressive and innovative with how they conduct their own information campaign, and we oftentimes cede that particular part of the battle space to the enemy. And so one of the core objectives of this project was to engage in that. And when you engage in those types of campaigns, you have to be willing to take risks. And so pushing out all the documents to us was a risk that, one, these documents are over a dozen years old at this point. So any concerns about, releasing particular pieces of information, while certainly not gone completely or mitigated to a certain degree, but it answers a lot of the questions from people who would suggest that maybe certain things are being cherry picked. So yes, long answer there to a short question, but we've thought through all these things and tried to balance sort of the pros and cons of redactions versus not, versus partial releases versus full releases.
I think I saw another question on this side. Yes, please. Okay, so the question was how to integrate cadets into the research process and what that's like as a faculty member. Perhaps we could start at the end of the panel with Dr. Hooton and then make our way down.
Thank you. It's actually really at the heart of the Black History Project. From day one, as much as some of it was isolating places, or not isolating, but identifying places where we could provide material for classroom use. From day one, we wanted to engage students in that process. So for example, I mentioned that I have a cadet working on a project about the integration of the Core Squad. There's already conversations about how we can use that material in the classroom, for example. But that project and where it came from was completely the cadet's idea. Last year, I had a cadet, the thesis actually won a military history award in the department. She did a project, she wrote a fantastic thesis on the experiences of Black women at West Point and the entire history of that. And that again came solely from her, but our role is to really cultivate and really inspire those cadets to go deeper into their project in terms of the types of historical conversations. So talking about when diversity at West Point happened, talking about, the different initiatives, and talking about the range of experiences that cadets from a variety of backgrounds have had, for example, but also connecting outside histories to the history of the Academy and to Black history here. And so it's really at the heart of it. We're talking about creating some videos, for example, that highlight cadets and their research that we can then put on the YouTube channel, but also be able to use in the classroom. So Colonel Scully is a cadet who's been working on projects about African-American soldiers during the American Revolution in the 6th Connecticut. And so being able to highlight that in revolutionary history classes is also showing that then reifies to cadets that their work then gets to be brought back into the conversation. And I think that's a really important part of it as well.
From my side, I guess everything I talked about here, we depend on the use of the cadets to connect to other people. In the Department of Foreign Languages, as I cited here, when the COVID started, when the pandemic started, we opened our eyes that we could take more advantage of the internet and all the tools we have available for us. So when the pandemic started, we started to put the cadets with a lot of different officers and get different perspective and experience. And not only talking to the officer, but nowadays we are at least once a month putting the cadets in touch with Brazilian cadets. For instance, in Brazil, they go to virtual rooms and they can talk privately about the Brazilian cadets' life, about the West Point cadets' life. They can talk about the Brazilian Army, the culture of the country, practicing the language, either Portuguese or English, to the Brazilian cadets. So all the times they are integrating in different ways. And it's really good to the cadets because now it's not only what I tell them, but they are proving that by themselves, talking straight to foreign people, and this put them out of the comfort zone. Because one thing is talk to the teacher here in the classroom. Another thing is talk to a native one in a different environment and have to interact in that way. So I guess pretty much what we do is to connect the cadets on these different events. And I guess that's it.
So Rachel, thanks for the question. I'd like to answer by expanding beyond just this project I talked about today and talk about the work we're doing in the psychology program that specifically brings cadets in to do research. And we do have some honors type thesis work that they're doing. They'll be presented tomorrow. I'm very excited about it. But all of our students also complete our integrative experience course. And tomorrow we'll have 24 projects briefed from those first teams. What we're doing now is mentor-enabled research. And the key underlying foundational question for the class is, how does the science of psychology influence the development of leaders of character? So in coordination with Dr. Jeff Peterson and the CAG, we've crafted about 18 questions overall that range from things like, how might we change admissions at West Point to enhance the way we can develop leaders of character? How might the honor system change? How might we enhance the way that we measure character as a graduation requirement? And also things about holistic wellness or sleep specifically, and how might we make changes to that grounded in the science of psychology. Inherent in that is learning. That's one of the lessons in the class as we think about how our cadets might be able to influence that and take the research from learning to craft a good answer to that question. And so that maybe is the connection back to this project. But broadly, what we're doing and the way we're bringing those cadets in through a mentor-enabled process, each of those 24 teams has a mentor, many of them current, future, or former faculty here at the Academy. We're guiding them through those challenging questions that will culminate tomorrow in some recommendations and a series of artifacts, broadly things like an Instagram page about sleep has been created. So that's one of the things the group will talk about, grounded in what we know about psychology. How might sleep help us enhance the development of character? So that's what we're doing. That's how we're incorporating them in the program. Thank you.
Ma'am, this project really started with us trying to think about how we could provide an interactive experience for the cadets enrolled in a specific course. And so we took a look at that, we provided it to the cadets, and then we assessed how well they did on exam questions and homeworks. But then we realized that this was a way to really rethink our curriculum in the environmental program and also in our GIS and geography programs. And so we had one of the co-authors on this, Major Nikki Harrell, is a member of our GIS team, and she really helped facilitate the creation of the Esri story map. And now she has an example in her class where she helped a colleague in an area that's really outside of her expertise, geology, but then tell a story. And she can use that for the cadets who are then taking her course. How do you tell a story? Something that you might not even be familiar with, but you now have this expertise in this technology to be able to achieve that. And so now the cadets that are taking that course are not all from the geography department. We have folks that are taking that as an elective from all different majors. And so now they can take that back to their department and say, this is a tool that I can use for my capstone project. This is a tool that I can use as a lieutenant to tell a story about, you know, anything really, fill in the blank. And so that's one of the applications that we realized was a great advantage of the work that we did, really, that was very specific and then has now grown and been something that we're really looking forward to using across our department.
All right, so I'll unfortunately be the bad guy here, acknowledge that our project did not have any cadet involvement, the one that I was talking about. Unfortunately, we did this on an incredibly tight time frame over a COVID-influenced summer, and just involving cadets was not feasible. That said, we definitely do focus heavily on ensuring that we get cadets as involved in the CTC's research as possible. We manage the CTC's, or the CTC manages, I should say, the Terrorism Studies minor program here, where we have a really fantastic group of cadets who are engaged in our courses and a lot of activities beyond our coursework to engage with the work of the CTC, both on the research side, but also in engagements with our partners across the operational and policy communities. On the research side, an example of a similar type project where we did have cadet involvement was one a little while back where we were conducting analysis of several thousand ISIS documents. And that was really, incredibly brutal piece of work to try to slog through all that. And we got some fantastic help from some cadets, particularly cadets with Arabic capabilities, who we dumped, again, thousands of documents in front of them and asked them to churn through them with us. And it was a really, really fantastic effort. And they did an unbelievable job, working probably more hours than they intended to and possibly should have. But they loved it. And they were able to have that engagement. We got a couple of them on NBC Nightly News as part of the project, which is pretty cool for them. So yeah, try to get them as involved as possible. Not always feasible, but we make the effort.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm John Buckett. I'm the president of the West Point chapter of AUSA.
found that presentation to be fascinating. And I was wondering to what extent, if it's available on paper, was something that I would be able to read. And also thought to be the dean, is there any consideration for that subject matter to become a course or part of a course, which would be an elective for the cadets? In light of the challenges facing our nation at the time, the subject matter seems to be particularly timely.
So, sir, thank you. Yes, the paper is published. It is in an academic journal, which means in some cases, of course, there are some limited access tools for that. It should be able to access it through the West Point Library. And as far as I know, there is not necessarily a place where we have a plan to build specifically a course focused on critical thinking, although I know that there are skills being taught in terms of academic success, and there are some courses out there, but we're not necessarily focused specifically on this epistemic or the nature of knowledge component, which informs our model, certainly. And hopefully the future research that we could do or others could do inspired by this model or others might help us learn more about what's happening in the complex information environment that's out there. And I think that could apply across any of those subcomponents I talked about. I mentioned users and curating. I think as we think about where that might have an effect in terms of education, it's helping people understand how to navigate that complex environment. So I think the potential is there, and courses like that are being developed in other places. Thank you.
So, yes, ma'am, you have a question? There is, ma'am. So Lieutenant General Swam asked, so Dr. Milton's research, which Mr. Dodwell would answer, if the model, process, or tool has an application in law enforcement scenarios, especially the case of transnational criminal organizations.
Yeah, and certainly our center does a significant amount of work with the law enforcement community to support them through our research. And so the model of taking documentation that's captured off the battlefield, I mean, there's a variety of different ways that process happens, both sort of through official channels that are kept more private, of course, on the intelligence and law enforcement side of the fence, where these types of documentation is taken and then integrated into legal actions against individuals who are arrested for their potential involvement or alleged involvement in these types of activities. Sort of where we would fit into that. We've done a significant amount of work with partners, again, on the law enforcement side, but also in places like the UN, who is doing a number of different things around the world to try to help facilitate the prosecution of war crimes, for example, in Iraq and Syria as a result of the war against ISIS. And how can we facilitate the use of this type of captured material to support those prosecutions? And we've had a role in that through conducting research, again, by taking this type of material and publicizing it in an open source domain that allows for a much wider breadth of activity that can happen and a much wider breadth of frankly, international legal actions that can be taken against these individuals. So yes, by, again, this notion of partnership and conducting research that, can connect different entities around the world is something that is very important to us, and the methodology we use for this can be applied to those types of activities.
We'll take a General Jeb's question now, ma'am.
What's guiding that? What's motivating it? It's ideological, it's practical, it's centering of all. I just wondered how you would characterize your partnerships.
Yes, ma'am. No, it's been really fascinating to watch how these organizations have evolved over time. They are absolutely learning organizations, and one of my favorite captured documents I've ever had the privilege of studying was essentially a lessons learned document that was produced by Islamic State of Iraq in the late 2000s, where essentially they took a look at how they got hammered pretty hard by us in the sort of 2006, 7, 8 timeframe, and put together a 62-point list, I believe it was, of lessons they had learned as a result of that experience. And then they did a further analysis several years later where they checked down the list to see how many of those lessons learned they had corrected or implemented, which sounds very much like something we would do. And they were absolutely doing the exact same thing. So they're learning organizations for one. On the question of collaboration, we see a mix. Certainly ideology is critically important to these organizations, at least the ones we're studying in the jihadist context. So ideology would prohibit them from collaborating with certain organizations strategically, although we absolutely see it happening at the tactical and operational level. Frankly, as most people know, Al-Qaeda and ISIS don't exactly get along. ISIS was an entity that sort of broke away from Al-Qaeda. And so these organizations, while they certainly agree in the long-term ideological goals, they do not agree in strategically how to get there, and they fight with each other all the time. That said, in certain locales around the world, we absolutely see indications of lower-level fighters and commanders working with each other across that boundary based on practical needs and so on and so forth. We also, frankly, see cases where you have militant groups of different ideologies, whether or not they're directly communicating with each other, certainly learning from each other. And this is in the online space primarily where we see this, where we see certain organizations. If you look at chatter in the jihadi online space, for example, they oftentimes make reference to operations conducted by white supremacist organizations or other movements like that, and talk about, well, this is how these guys did it, and these are the things that happened to them, and this is how we should think about how we should conduct the things that we're doing. Yeah, we absolutely see that collaboration. There are limitations, of course, and certain lines they won't cross, but yes, they are doing this every day.
Okay. Other questions from the room? We have one from online that we could go to if no one has a question right now. So this question is for Dr. Hooton, and Felicia Rivera would like to have you describe the major milestones that you plan to meet in your 10-year Black History study.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. Within each line of effort, we have some short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals to kind of build up through. And for example, one of the kind of culminating long-term goals is we have some digital products that we already use in the department in a lot of our core courses that are essentially primary source books that are kind of collected primary sources into chapters about a variety of topics. And one of the pieces of this is both perhaps cadets, but especially instructors doing primary source research, looking into everything from letters to newspapers to videos and audio and so forth, and creating some of these new products for things like the history of Reconstruction or the history of African American service, or thinking about bigger themes like service and citizenship. And so we've outlined not only those books themselves, the big topics, but individual chapters. And so rather than trying to tackle all of these books all at once, we have midterm goals of taking out chunks of these books and working on individual chapters. And because we're going to have folks coming in with a variety of expertise, lining people up with the chapters or the pieces that fit with their expertise, so that they can contribute in very meaningful ways. That's one example. Another thing that we've talked about is collaborations outside of USMA once COVID is more under control, is being able to send students on summer internships where they can do research on very specific topics either at academic institutions or even local institutions, so a place like the Schomburg Center in New York City, or collaborating with, for example, like the Underground Railroad Association in Albany. And so allowing students to do research in some of these places as either part of an early part of a senior thesis, or even just as part of a broader project. We also recently have been looking at some developing archives here that we can use to look into various parts of Black history in the Army more broadly, as well as Black history here. And also there are some courses that we're adding material to, or that we're tweaking a bit, and finding ways to develop new courses as well as new course material. And so it's a pretty wide ranging 10-year plan, but I think we've got a lot of really good, meaningful options for both faculty and cadet development.
Thank you. I invite other questions. have a question of my own if we don't have one from the room. I'm particularly interested for Colonel Deakins, coming from an EECS perspective. I'm fascinated to think about the potential for your model to feed back into the algorithm that actually suggests or rank orders the tweets or other content, and even some of the ethics that might be involved with doing that. And just wondering if you've thought about that potential, which really goes into machine learning training. We have a number of faculty that are interested in things like that, and I think a good opportunity for interdisciplinary collaboration.
So I certainly agree with you. I think there's an opportunity there for collaboration. When we've thought about this model, because we are education researchers, I think we've generally been focused on where we might educate others and then change the user. And so you probably heard that as I've answered some other questions, that that's generally where our focus has been. But certainly I do think further investigation into this model and models like it would let us know more about how those algorithms that drive the information that comes to us affect us. I also think a lot of that information is being gathered in other fields. Certainly the corporations that drive and produce these things understand some of the effects, and there's other things we still need to learn. So there certainly is, I think, a chance there for some collaboration, and we would probably come in on that user side. Then there's so much other that can be changed about the context and environment that I think would be very interesting. Thank you.
All right, one last call for any questions. We don't have any online, and I think we've exhausted those from the room. So just as we wrap up, I would like to thank all the panelists for taking the time to share their work and giving us all new ideas about what research in a connected world really means. Thank you to our audience, live and connected, for your interest as well. And I do hope that this panel helps prime everyone's excitement for Projects Day tomorrow. And I'll turn it back over to Colonel Kimball.
Thank you, Colonel Chua. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for helping us celebrate these faculty members and their hard work. Please join me now in a round of applause for them and for our moderator. Thank you all very much for joining us today, either here or remotely. We hope to see you at some of our Projects Day sessions tomorrow, again, either in person or remotely. You can access the app and the schedule for those sessions at westpoint.edu/projectsday. Go Army.